Welcome to Arise Life, a community of believers being equipped, empowered, and released into their destiny. For more information, go to ariselife.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Every transitional season is marked by frustration. What does frustration feel like? What are the signs that you are frustrated? No movement, nowhere to go.
Everything angers you.
Angers. What else? Chaos. Discouragement.
Arrested,
Stuck, yeah. What else? Hopeless, confusion. Sadness.
despair.
Absence of peace.
Let's see. Despair. No peace.
Unanswered questions.
Unanswered questions. What's that? Strong emotion. And what did I hear? Uncertainty. What else?
Resistance to your vision.
Resistance to your vision. To vision. What else? Loss of trust. So, what I want to say is, you need to hear me on this. Frustration is necessary. But what do we often learn from frustration? What is the lesson we take away from frustration? Not the one we should, but the one we do. Don't work. Doesn't work.
It's not fatal.
How do you mean?
I mean, yeah, I'm frustrated and I live.
Okay, I don't learn that. But there's still a chance. I can die yet.
I haven't died yet.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm still alive. That's
There you go. What else?
Here we go again.
What else?
You can fix on your own.
All by myself.
Why does this happen?
What? Give up. Come on. What else?
I almost forgot.
Yeah.
I have problems reading my Bible.
Say that again.
I have problems reading my Bible.
You have problems reading your Bible? Yes. Yes. When I am discouraged, do I want to try to read the Bible? What's the point, right? That's it. Yes. When I'm discouraged, when I'm frustrated, what's the point? And I will quit. I will give up, right? So
Either give up or push through into something that I can fix myself.
I think you nailed it. It's either give up or what Andre said, do it all by myself. Who here, you're like, you know you're supposed to do things with other people, but you got sick and tired of waiting and decided to do it yourself. Abraham, Ishmael, you know how it works, right? And what happens when instead of doing it God's way, at God's time, you do it your way at your time? Failure, right? Who here is like, I should have just laid down and died instead. Like that would have been an improvement. So what I want to challenge us though is frustration is God's design. Great example is when a baby is being born, it is a very frustrating process. Ladies, right? I mean, it's at first it seems like this is a stupid idea. There's got to be a better way to do this. Like, I don't know, zipper or teleportation, right? But this is not a good idea. But the interesting thing is the more they study what happens to a baby through birth, the pressure of it is what the baby needs. It's what cleanses the lungs of fluids. It's what activates certain processes in a baby. And yes, if somebody's been born C-section, they can do some things, but they're discovering more and more how much that process is necessary, that frustration. In the same way that the frustration of a butterfly trying to get out of a chrysalis is what dries out its wings and strengthens its wings so it can fly. If you remove the frustration, it will never fly. And for those of you who've been pregnant, ladies, you know that from about some X number of weeks, it's frustration in the process, right? You're like, I thought this would be glorious. They talked about the glow. Where's the glow, right? There's this thing, but the frustration is essential. And here is why. The frustration makes you decide whether it's worth it or not, but also to give up the things you can't take with you. Who here wants to take it all with you? You know, one of the great things I always see is like, we all want community, but we also want our personal privacy and space, right? And the more you draw close to someone, who here is going, okay, that's not how I signed up for this. I don't need you in my business. That's not what I signed up for. I signed for the benefits, not the struggle, the hard parts. And there's a thing about frustration that says, is it worth it to keep going through? Is it worth it if I don't get everything the way I want when I want? Can I trust him that he is good? One of the most powerful verses God has annoyingly repeated to me over again is Isaiah. Will a woman come up to the point of birth and not give birth? Will she have the labor pains and not? That is what I want to say this. And so for myself, in the last 2 months, I have been in deep travail. Travail is like labor pains. It's where you can't pull back. You're hurting so bad because of the promise. If you do not have a promise that hurts, you have numbed yourself to hope. I've been there. Promises hurt. Why? Because it's not yet. What's the point? It's too late. Best part about the Bible, I don't know why, but God chooses, 76-year-old Abraham, 80-year-old Moses, and a 92-year-old Daniel. I'm like, he removes all my excuses. But there's this thing, the promise of God should hurt. And we want to stand at a distance and go, if it happens, it happens. You know my address. If it's important, you'll make it happen. No, he wants us to co-labor with him to birth things into the earth. This is why it says that all of creation groans, as in childbirth, groans that we, the sons and daughters of God, might appear. In other words, people who look like God in this earth, who bring the kingdom of heaven to earth in the spheres of our influence. And yet, in our frustration, we pull back, don't we? I can't tell you the number of women who I've heard say that, after the first hour, they're like, okay, I'm good. We can put the baby back.
Oh,
Yeah, another few weeks is fine. I'm good. This is not what I signed up for. Right? There's this thing. Will you push? And so for the last 2 months, that's what I've done. Because one of the things is, to be frustrated is not to deny that there is good, but it says, I'm not okay if I don't get the more. I'm not okay staying in Egypt. I'm not okay staying in the desert. I want the more. And I'm willing. And many of you have sat with me in that frustration. I am not okay with less than what he's promised. And I won't settle it to what I can do on my own or do by our own strength. And every person here in the sound of my voice, you have something God has promised. And for some of you, it's just like quivering because you've shoved it so far deep. Never going to try that again. I've been in that place. But God lures us with the calling of our identity and our calling to not fall back and to actually press into what he has for us. And so in that place, as I've wrestled, one of the things I've wrestled with is the fact that we are called to be a body, but not like the blob. We are one, right? But a body, what does a body do? It actually does stuff. It's a body that reveals the goodness of God in the earth. It's a body that doesn't live for its own sake. Every single cell in your body does not live by itself for itself. It lives from the rest of the body for the sake of the rest of the body. And when I looked around our body, I'll be honest, starting with me, I see that we are people who, by and large, 95% of our spiritual life is focused on me and mine. Can I be real? And what I realize is the Lord has really been on my heart. He said, there's things you've been crying out for, and the reason you haven't is because you're doing it on your own, for yourself, and for your own. And you need to begin to live the way I live, which He is love. This is how we know what love is, right? And so in this thing, as I've been wrestling with this, I've been crying out to God. I said, God, does anybody even want this? Is this anything anybody wants to go for? Because the American Christianity is health, wealth, and prosperity, right? Fix my family, fix my stuff, take care of me. And I'm thinking, gosh, I don't even know, like half the time, do I want it? I'm like, God, is it worth it? Will it happen? Is it worth going for? And as I cried out, I said to God, what Masha was praying, let there be just the tiniest bit of green, the tiniest little signs that this is in fact what you're doing. You remember Gideon? Gideon's like, God goes, behold my mighty man. He's like, I have no evidence of that in my life. And then what does he do? He goes, okay, you're my man to deliver the thing that hurts you so bad about Israel being completely enslaved. You're my man. And he puts down a sign. He says, God, just show me this is real, that this is you. And one of the best things for me is in the last month, I have seen so many signs of green in y'all. What I mean is I've heard you go, I'm wrestling. What does it mean to share my faith with another? I'm wrestling with how do I open myself to other people? I'm wrestling with what does it look like to serve other people? I'm wrestling with what does God want from me that's not about me? I'm hearing it, that wrestling. And I'm like, and that's the green. And my heart is so encouraged. But not encouraged that we camp here, but that we keep going on. And so many of you know that our vision for the church from the very beginning has always been to equip, to empower, and release for the sake of the harvest. Many people have been equipped, empowered, and released themselves under their own recognizance, using the gifts of God for their own means. That's never been our goal. Our goal is a body that is laying down its life for the world and for the sake of the world. And so one of the things that has been on our heart, Masha's and my heart for the last 20, 25 years, has been this fact that we are overdue as a world for massive harvest movement. Throughout history, there have been these massive movements of ingathering when people come rushing into the church. And many of them were failed. Very few of the people who initially got saved actually made it in the church. And that's something that's grieved our hearts. And literally, as we began on this journey 25 years ago, it was like, how do we walk this out in a way that, what does it look like to be able to be ready to receive the lost and to bring them into family, disciple them, and release them back to bring in more harvest? What does that look like? And one of the things the Lord showed me about 15 years ago is every single one of those waves of harvest is preceded by a wave of turmoil in the earth. That societal structures begin to break and there's upheaval. And this is not a cause for fear. How do I know? Because you're here today. It is not fatal. But the reality is when a tsunami comes into culture, and I don't think you need to be a prophet to see that things are breaking. But the reality is as a tsunami begins, a wave begins, you've got three options. One, stand in the surf and go, ah, and let it crush you. Paralyzed. Two, do what the people in Gideon's time did. Every time they saw the Philistines coming in, they hid in holes in the ground. How do I save my stuff? The Mormon churches tells all their people they have to save 7 years of food. He who attempts to save his life will lose it. But in fact, the reality is throughout the history of the church, when plagues would hit cities, the people would flee and the Christians would go into the cities that were gripped by the plague to care for the living, to heal the living and to care for the dying. And that is where the gospel goes forth. It goes forth for those who did not love their lives even unto death. And in fact, that there is a wave coming. I said, well, Lord, what's the third option? He said, get your board and paddle out. Get your board and paddle out to the breakwater. And the image, if you go with that imagery, and we pull up the next slide. When we go with this imagery, you want to be ready to surf. Who here has tried to swim in a full set of clothes? It's a lot of fun. No, but the reality is you want to be ready to surf. You want to be ready to go, but you also need a board. And in this analogy, the board is your identity as an individual and your identity as a body. Our identity as a body. That board is what we are anchored to for in our identities. It's who God says we are. And also, our identities tell us how we relate to each other, but it also tells us how we relate together. And that board is what you ride. And so you don't actually flee the wave. What do you do when the wave starts coming? You get excited. You start paddling to get up to speed. Listen, there are things coming in this earth, and we can either flee and save our lives, or we can run to the battle. We can prepare. And how do we prepare ourselves? With identity. And so part of that identity piece is why we're going after identity on this session coming up on Fridays. Identity, who you are, determines how you function in this life. Anybody ever tried to use a hammer as a saw? I actually have. I don't recommend it. Anybody been there? You got one tool and you're like, okay, I don't know how I do this, right? You know, take the claw and kind of rub it back and forth. It doesn't work. And what if many of the failures in our life is because we're trying to be someone we were never called to be? And we were trying to, as Andre said, try to fulfill the vision all on our own, when in fact we need other people. The vision is, any vision you have is not for you alone. A vision of God is always involves other people. And so, to go a little step further, as I've been wrestling with this, many of you have figured out that this is not maybe a church like you've been in before. We'll share later. For real, shocking. And you may not understand where that comes from. And without being intentional, you might think we are who we've always been. We started out in a model very similar to most every other churches, but over time, God has been changing us to be who he has us to be. And I was really wrestling because we went to a pastor's retreat. And first thing I found is most of the pastors who were on that retreat were trying to get out of the ministry so they could do ministry. In other words, they were running ministries, but they never got to minister. I was like, right? And in fact, one of the things I was realizing in that but they were succeeding, right? Numbers, like how do you, numbers, size of ministries, so on and so forth. And I felt like God said, is that what you want? The reality is no. My heart has been burning for something different, something more that God has for us. And I'm not, so the Lord gave me this image. I said, who are we? And he gave me the image, this is going to work for about half the room, of an SR-71 Blackbird. Who are my people? Who knows what an SR-71 Blackbird is? Yep, I have not seen a single female hand raised. Okay, I see that. Thank you, Danielle. Danielle's with me. Oh, Colleen. Colleen knows. Good. That's true. Yeah, Greg's dad actually worked on the, the guidance system? Guidance system on it. So the SR-71 Blackbird it is amazing, incredible, fast. Oh, so fast. 2,500 miles per hour. Fast. Airplane. Gorgeous, right? But what happened is, if we stop right there, you know the problem with the SR-71 Blackbird is it's a horrible airplane. Absolutely horrible. Horrible. First of all, on takeoff, it gets so hot that everything expands so much that it leaks out half of its fuel. And it's such a horrible airplane that it uses the other half just to get up to like 20,000 feet. Well, what do you do with an airplane that has no fuel? It's called a rock, right? And in fact, what happens is as it gets up to that height, what they have to do is they have to go to the next slide. Thank you. You are awesome. The next slide, they have to refuel it. In other words, it can't take off from the ground with what it needs to get up there. So one of the interesting things in the life of our church, when we set out to come here, first of all, we couldn't have come here. We had no money. We did one time, if you've been in here, you know we don't do asks for money, right? One time I got tricked into doing it. It was horrible, and it actually took, our giving took a nosedive. And so I was like, I'll never do it again, right? But what happened is, in that, we needed, if I remember correctly, we needed $270,000 to get this space and to build it out. and we did not have it. Who've been in that place where you have an issue, God's calling you to do something, and you do not have the funds? So what do we tell God at that point? Sorry about your luck. Am I the only one? You're like, well, if you really want it, then you know my address. But then we got the bid for the work. And the bid for the work was $150,000 and blah, blah, blah. And when we, as a finance team, which, by the way, Bruce and Jill were there when we met there in Riverstone in that upper room, we looked at the amount, and the amount was within $100, I think it was like less than $50, of the total amount we had in the account. To do phase 1. What's the problem? There's phase 2, and there's phase 3. Who here? I'm only going to go if I've got phase 2 and phase 3 covered. But this faith rose up in the room. We were like, yes, this is obviously a sign from God. Let's empty it all, pour it all out. Woo! You know, I was like, and I was so encouraged. They were more faith-filled than I was. I was like, okay, let's go for it. And then it came time for phase 2. And guess what? When we went to the coffers, how much money did we have? Within $100 again of exactly what we needed. And so we did it again. And when it came time for phase 3, I'll be honest, there was some delay. Who are my people? If it's delay, it must not be God. It was hard. But then the moment came and we did it again. There's a reality too. If you want what God has, you cannot wait till you have everything you need. Did the Israelites have all the food they needed to get to the promised land? None of it. They had gold. Right? They didn't have anything. What's that? They eventually ate that too. That's true. Good point. But the reality is, when you're groaning and you're frustrated, many times I'm frustrated waiting for the fullness before I'll obey. Okay, how about this? I will do what you've called to me when you give me the perfect people who 100% agree with me all the time to do it with. Do you know where those people are? Because I've been looking. What the heck? Right? No. You're like, Jesus turns around and he's like, this is the way my take. You might read your Bible differently. But in John 5, when he turns around and he took his ministry from 14 or 15,000 people down to just 12 disciples. And he turns around and he goes, aren't you going to leave too? I think it's because he looked at him and he was like, abort, try again. I think a couple of those guys were just accidentals. They were like, oh, sorry, I zoned out during the message. I just didn't know. Like God is, but anyway, all that to say is there's something that we go before we have what we need, but we have what we need to start, not to finish. And so if we can go to the next line, this is what I said. If you want to talk about a really bad airplane, on the left we have a Cessna 172. It's lovely, beautiful. Recommend it. What do you think a Cessna is good for? Training. Gliding. Little short distances. Little runabouts. Little fun thing. Quick and easy. Boeing 787. Little bit different. What's it good for? Long distance. Passengers. Comfort. Power. Speed. Good. Yeah. What's that? Travel. Exactly. That's awesome. And you know the great thing is, then you have the SR-71 Blackbird. Seats too comfortably. Not comfortably. Actually, you have to wear a spacesuit while you're in it. So I hope you don't have to go to the bathroom. Right? Let's go to the next one if we compare this. If you look at these, if you look at, what is the difference in altitude that they fly at? Cessna is between 5 and 10,000. The Boeing is up there at 40,000 feet. Where over on the right side? Do you see the right side? On the very top, what do you see? 80,000 feet. It's on the edge of outer space. It looks at the black. It sees the curve of the earth. And the reason why the Blackbird is such a horrible plane is that number you see in front of that. That's called the glide ratio or the lift to drag ratio. 16 is good. That's why the 787 is so efficient. It just glides through the air. It's amazing. The Cessna, not too bad with 9. What does the Blackbird have? They call it a flying brick because it has so little lift with its wings. I thought that was the point of an airplane. Like, I thought wings were the point, to lift it. No. In fact, what the goal of it is it uses all of its energy, it drains the tanks to get up to where it's meant to thrive in outer space. In outer space. What I want to say is, where you're called to, the promised land was outer space to slaves in Egypt. The promised land, where you're called to be, the people around you don't understand. It sounds silly. If you were telling someone with the Wright brothers, hey, next step, we'll build a plane for outer space, they would have said, you're nuts. Because you need air, lift, all those things. But in fact, that's where it thrives. And the amazing thing about the Blackbird is the Blackbird has never been shot down. It did reconnaissance over the Soviet Union, over Vietnam. It was targeted by missiles multiple times. In Syria, in Vietnam, in Russia, it was targeted. Do you know what it did? Put the pedal to the metal and just went, sayonara, buddy. Because what is it made for? Speed. But to live with that kind of speed, it has to fly where another plane does not. Because what lifts a plane at the lower altitudes, air, is what creates drag on a rocket outside of it actually slows it down. So here's my question. Every single one of us, and as a body, we have a calling that is outside the atmosphere. It's outside the natural. It's outside where I'm living right now. And the reality is, we're at a point where there comes a point where you have to say, are we going to gun it or not? Because if you do not floor it, taking off with an SR-70 Blackbird, you know what you're going to do? Just run off the end of the runway, and now you have a car, and soon an Airbnb. Because, and the same thing, if you bring up an SR-71 Blackbird up to cruising altitude of a Boeing, guess what? It's going to run out of fuel extremely quickly. It has to make the push all the way to where it's called to go. Who here, God gave you a call and you stopped halfway? I've been there, done that. I just can't go any further. You know, it reminds me of a 6th grader, a Boy Scout on a hiking trip. I can't go any further. They're like, well, I don't know what we're going to do with you. I guess you're living here from here on out. I don't know what to tell you. Leave him on the mountain, right? There's a reality to which sometimes you got to realize the way forward is shorter than the way back. It's worth it. We're already in. Might as well go for the gusto, right? And so what I want to challenge us as a body, what does that look like for us to be that? So if we can go to the next slide. I took that out of order, my bad. Going on, Heather. Thank you. You're amazing. So this is the model we started with. This is the model. This is pretty traditional, right? Where what do? You know, if you invite the lost to church, if the goal is evangelism, discipleship, church growth, and church planning, the first step is what? Invite people to church, right? Who got trained in that? Like, the goal is just to invite people to church. 3 of us. Awesome. Great. You know, and then you get them to attend church, they hear a message, there's an altar call, they make a response to salvation, and then you hand them off to somebody to disciple them. That's what I grew up with. That's a traditional model. It's based upon, a lot of times you have professional ministers, you have programs, you have all these things. But one of the things God has been doing is flipping that in some ways for us. For us, we're finding it's actually more about inviting people into our lives, not inviting them to church. Inviting them, sharing our lives, and that means sharing the good, the bad, and the... I cannot tell you, you know the number one reason why people don't like Christians? Starts with H. Hypocrite. Hypocrisy. What is hypocrisy? I know you have problems, but you act like you don't. You act like everything's fine, but I can tell. They need to see our lives so that the next thing, what he says in Peter, he says that they may ask you for the reason for the hope that you have. Would anybody know you have hope? The only way they'll know you have hope is if they see the size of your problems and the size of your Lord. And then in that place, whether it's inviting them into church and they're encountering God with you, or in the space they're saying, I want the God that you have. That's when you're bringing them into church. That's when you're getting them in. I'll be honest, I have watched people on a Sunday morning, and I'm like, I don't know how you got here, but I hope you make it. Because you were expecting one thing and we're something different. What I've watched is when people come and people have told them, this is who we are. I like your life. I want what you have. When they come here, they're ready to receive how it comes. And so, but it doesn't end there. Going to the next one. That's just the beginning going on. And the beginning is because then you continue. You don't just hand people off. You continue to walk with them in friendship. You connect them with the smaller groups of people, right? That's why we do Friday nights. That's why we do Friday lunches. That's why we do Saturday lunch. That's why we do men's group. You connect them into your smaller community. They engage in activities. They engage in acts of service. What Lizzie said, we got to go out. We got to do. Our life should have an expression. And then that is, in that context, large gatherings make sense. But if you come to this as a car wash, who here has come in with no desire and left the same way you came in? This is not a passive thing, is it? And that makes it hard sometimes. So, but it doesn't end there. Yep, keep going. You got it. It doesn't end there, because the goal is not that we just keep gathering. The gathering gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But the goal is to be big enough to be able to send out and plant another church. And another church, and another church, and another church. Because that's what we're here for. Because, see, love is never about itself. Love is always about the other. It's about giving it away. Okay, you guys look like you've been through a car wash. So stay with me. There's two parts I want you to get out of that whole thing. Frustration is a sign that God has a promise, and he's not done yet. And he's asking whether you and I will agree with him to go for it. And there's frustration both in terms of our individual vision and in terms of our corporate vision. Okay?
For more information, go to ariselife.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.